So the fundamental and the most often part of the deadlift that's missed is the hip hinge. So for a deadlift, this motion, the majority of the motion here is actually occurring at my hip. If you notice, my knee bends a little, but my hip crease is much more bent than my knee because the majority of the motion occurs at the hip. And learning how to bend at the hip independently of the knee or the back can be a really tricky thing to do, and it's something a lot of people struggle with. Most people, when they're deadlifting, tend to move their hip and then they also move their back a little bit, or they'll move their knee a lot and they'll end up squatting. So the way to practice a hip hinge or train the hip hinge so you can have a good understanding of it is to take a PVC or a broom or something like that, and you're going to put it on your back. You're looking for 3 points of contact here: the back of your head, the middle of your back, and then your sacrum. From this position, you're then going to hip hinge without bending your knees. So this completely isolates the motion to that hip joint. If you find yourself losing contact in the middle, it's because you arched your back. If you find yourself losing contact at the bottom, it's because you rounded your back. And these can be really subtle nuances too. So the mistakes I was making there are very gross, kind of like obvious faults, but what comes up more often than not is just very subtle faults. And just maybe it's a little bit of motion, not a lot of motion, but that little bit of extra motion where it shouldn't be occurring in a WOD or a workout where there's high volume deadlifts can add up and cause an injury or cause pain or cause discomfort rather than it being just one obvious clear fault. I would say the majority of the people that I treat that are fitness athletes don't have one clear glaring issue. It's a lot of small tweaks and fine tuning of things that really kind of narrow down on what's going on. So with this hip hinge then here, practicing this, if you're not sure if you're doing it correctly or not, you can actually take the PVC, if you have a weightlifting belt, and you can put the PVC here and you can strap the PVC to yourself. Then with the weightlifting belt holding the PVC on, you can do a deadlift. And that can be a self-check for you to be like, hey, am I losing contact? What does this feel like? Am I moving my hip and not my back? Am I moving my hip and not my knee that much? The knee does move a little bit in a deadlift, but it shouldn't be the primary motion or the joint where most of the motion is occurring. One thing that really kind of highlights this, or most individuals with 2 legs, they're pretty decent with the hip hinge, but really an ultimate control and awareness of that hip hinge is the ability to do it on 1 leg. So a lot of the times doing it on 1 leg is much harder than 2 simply because you add balance and you add stability and you add a whole different degree of coordination and control that isn't involved when you're using 2 legs. And because of that, it can really highlight a lot of faults that you wouldn't see if you just practice the hip hinge with 2 legs. So standing on 1 leg, hinging at the hip. Just at the hip, isolating motion to here. Your hamstrings should become tense. Your muscles of your feet will probably be kicking in. Just like that. Really narrowing it down, focusing on the hip. Most people will be able to go further. This is about as far as I can go today because we had a lot of deadlifts in yesterday's WOD. So my hamstrings are sore, they're tight, they're not letting me move a lot, but most people should be able to get probably to about here on that single leg pretty comfortably. So the hip hinge, it's the most fundamental part of the deadlift. It's the most often missed, and really mastering this and concentrating on it and becoming really good at it is one way to improve your deadlift. Have a wonderful night.